Uh-oh. Okay, we'll start with this. What is our last look at Beatric Ferrera's bid to become IBF champion this weekend opposite the ring? Veteran fighter, Argentinian slugger Janina Lescano on the undercard of McGrail versus Leach. Beatric Ferrera sports professional record of 4 wins with no losses, no draws, 3 knockouts. To Janina Lescano, who sports a professional record of 14 wins. 14 wins with 3 losses, no draws, 4 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 17 professional bouts. She's got 13 more fights than Beatric Ferrera. A lot more pro fights, a lot more rounds in the bank, and yet they're putting Beatric in this situation that speaks to their level of confidence in this fighter, not due to her professional experience, but her amateur experience, her amateur exploits. For those not aware, Beatric is an Olympic gold medalist. They're both registered as standing in at 5'4" by BoxRec, but BoxRec is often wrong when it comes to the tail of the tape. Janina Lescano is noticeably taller and noticeably longer than Beatric Ferrera, though once that opening bell sounds, I don't think it's going to matter. Beatric is going to be all over her. She's going to be all over Janina Lescano like a cheap suit. Not dissimilar from what we saw in Janina's fight with Caroline Dubois. It's the same underlying principle. Caroline Dubois was too fast, too sharp, too strong, and too aggressive for Janina to keep her out. And I expect to see the same exact thing this weekend when Beatric Ferrera shares the ring with her. Beatric is going to close the distance, put punches together, and fluster Janina Lescano mid-range to inside. She's going to be too strong for her there. And in spite of Janina's generous physical dimensions for lightweight, because she is a very tall, she is a very statuesque lightweight, she doesn't manage the distance well enough to keep the smaller fighter out. So it's going to be a repeat. A repeat of the Dubois fight, a repeat of the Mayra Moneo fight. And what about Estelle Mosley? Olympic gold medalist Estelle Mosley. Well, the fight between Estelle and Janina was a lot more competitive than the 2 aforementioned fights, because Estelle is nowhere near as aggressive or strong as either Caroline Dubois or Mayra Moneo. That loss was a little different for Janina. She didn't look half bad in that fight, but she is going to look bad in this one. She is going to look bad this weekend. Mid-range to inside as Beatric crashes the pocket, puts punches together, and overpowers her there. This is for the vacant IBF title, Katie Taylor's old title, heralding the end of Katie Taylor's long reign as this division's IBF champion. She won that title from then champion Victoria Bustos of Argentina way back there in 2018. 6 years ago. She won the WBO title following year in 2019 from then unbeaten champion Rose Volante, a hard puncher. That title has since gone vacant too, since Katie Taylor became undisputed champion upstairs at 140. Rhiannon Dixon is currently this division's reigning WBO champion, and very soon Beatric Ferrera will become its IBF champion, putting pressure on all the other titleists, everybody else at this weight, to have to deal with her. Up until this point, Beatric Ferrera has been a high-risk, low-reward kind of fighter. Why fighter? She doesn't have a belt, the fight doesn't pay much, and she's likely going to kick your ass. Well, not much has changed. She's still likely going to kick your ass, but at least if you fight her after Saturday, it's for a title. The landscape at 135 is changing. Beatric Ferrera being there is going to put pressure on everyone to have to deal with her at some point. And yes, that includes her matchroom stablemate, Rhiannon Dixon, who doesn't come from the same amateur background as she does, but she's a champion now, and once you become a champion, the training wheels come off.
Not just Rhiannon, Caroline Dubois.
Let's just be honest. I have a very high opinion of Caroline Dubois' boxing, her ability, and her future, but she has quite shamelessly been avoiding a fight with Beatric Ferrera, and everybody knows it.
She's got all this energy for Rhiannon, but none for Beatrice when they're promoted by the same promoter.
It's the difference between one Matchroom Valkyrie and another. All of that amateur experience and that gold medal. That's the difference, and that's why Caroline don't keep the same energy for Beatrice that she has for Rhiannon.
Beatrice winning that belt, that changes things.
To my knowledge, Katie Taylor still has the WBC and WBA titles at this weight, but it's only a matter of time before she vacates them, and I anticipate at least one is gonna go to Caroline.
See what she does when that happens.
In men's welterweight news, per a tweet from veteran boxing scribe Dake Jonovan, Derek James has filed a lawsuit against Errol Spence with the Dallas County District Court. James, the 2022 Trainer of the Year, seeks damages in excess of $5 million, nearly half from what he believes he's still owed from Terrence Crawford fight last July.
The story is, it's not just from the Crawford fight.
The story is that Errol Spence Jr. hasn't been upfront with his longtime trainer Derek James for some time as to what he was making fight by fight, and as a result of that, Derek feels he's owed compensation. Robert Littall, BSO, who documented the matter, says Derek James is suing Errol Spence Jr. for $5 million over the Bud Crawford fight. My understanding is Errol paid a flat fee, but no percentage of the upside of the pay-per-view, which was millions of dollars. Ryan Garcia says he paid James fairly and way more than Errol. Sad to see, to be honest, which is more or less confirmation of what we've been hearing.
That based on what he started making when he started working with Ryan Garcia and when he started working with Anthony Joshua, Derek realized he was getting more money from those guys than he was getting from Spence, even though he was with Spence longer.
It just wasn't adding up to Derek. Robert continued, I just read Derek James's lawsuit against Spence. A couple of things. They never had a written contract. Big no-no.
Nope.
James says he and Errol had an oral agreement of 10% of his purses. James never got a full accounting of what Spence made in his fights. That's a big no-no.
He trusted him.
James didn't realize that he may be getting underpaid until Ryan Garcia and likely Anthony Joshua were paying him more than Spence. Spence paid him $350,000 for the Crawford fight.
What?
And initially told him that he only made $3.5 million, but in a phone call, Spence admitted he made at least $25 million and had been robbing James.
What a fucking scumbag.
Copy of the court document reads, on February 15th, 2024, Mr. Spence admitted to Mr. James during a phone call that Mr. Spence was paid $25 million for the Crawford fight as his guaranteed purse.
What? He only gave Derek $350,000 out of that?
Additionally, he admitted that he was not true to Mr. James when he attempted to pay Mr. James $350,000 as compensation for the Crawford fight. Mr. Spence said he was man enough and honest and truthful enough to admit that following the Crawford fight, he did rob Mr. James by paying him $350,000, and he had to own up to it. Mr. Spence acknowledged that it was wrong, and he had to own up to his shit.
More like Derek figured you out.
Derek James said he always trusted that Spence was paying him accurate amounts, but now thinks Spence lied about how much he made in multiple fights and screwed him out of at least $5 million in total, if not more. PBC at times do their contracts a little different, with low guarantees and most of the money coming off the pay-per-view upside. Looks like Errol, according to James, at least never paid him on anything but the upfront guarantee, the guaranteed cash, before the upside comes in.
You have to understand that Derek has been in Errol's corner for a very long time.
For Errol to do Derek James like this after all that time, Derek James, who was once Trainer of the Year, I mean, is this anything that the former Trainer of the Year should have had to endure? He got you to the IBF title, the WBC title, the WBA title, and this is how you thanked him.
Looks like karma came to bite Spence in the ass.
You did Derek James dirty. In turn, Terrence Crawford did you dirty and exposed you in front of everybody. Now Derek is finishing a job. You're a fucking scumbag.
Wow.
Spence contends their oral agreement of 10% was simply for his guaranteed purse, not for his total revenue pay-per-view upside. That is a sticky legal issue. Going to have to talk to a lawyer about it. I think Spence legally is in good shape.
All jokes aside, he might be.
Because Derek James was in Errol Spence Jr.'s corner long before Errol ever fought on pay-per-view. So this verbal agreement for 10% of the guaranteed purse wouldn't have included pay-per-view upsides.
Because there were none.
Now there is the moral ambiguity of it all to be addressed, that no matter what, Spence knew what he was bringing in, and he didn't think to cut his longtime trainer a bigger piece of the pie for having invested so much of his time with him.
Time in him.
That as your purses got bigger fight by fight and you started making better money, you didn't think to share it with your longtime trainer? Robert continued, the legal issue is when you have an oral agreement for a percentage, is that just for the guaranteed purse or for the total revenue you end up making from the fight? If you are a lawyer, chime in. It appears someone like Ryan Garcia is paying on total revenue, and that got James to thinking.
How could I be making more money from Ryan than I'm making from Spence when I've been with Spence longer?
Yeah, Spence got beef with my coach. What's good? Come see me. You want to sue him? I want to beat you up.
Yo, facts.
Facts, bro. Do. Knockout Errol. Nice.
As a result of this, Ryan Garcia is now claiming that he would like to share the ring with Errol Spence Jr. and knock him out. I don't actually know that that's going to materialize. I don't actually know that's going to result in a fight, but I don't actually know that Derek is going to be rewarded any money either. An oral agreement? When was it made?
When and where? In what state?
What exactly were the terms, and do the two affected parties agree on what those terms were? Because if they don't, it's a bona fide case of he said, she said. Spence's word is just as good as Derek's in that situation, and in that situation, I don't see how he can be held liable.
He says he was man enough to do this and man enough to admit that. If he wants to do the right thing, the honorable thing.
You cut Derek James a check and convince him to call this whole thing off.
Not because Derek stands a good chance of winning. I don't think he does.
But if you want to do the right thing, well, that's the right thing to do.
They say money changes people.
And I don't necessarily agree with that money changes people so much as it exposes who they are, who they always were.
You could have cut this guy a piece of the pie at any time.
Not because of a legally binding contract or a verbal agreement, but because this guy's been in your corner forever. You often hear the relationship between a fighter and his trainer romanticized.
Film and media.
But the reality is not as rosy. It took for him to work with one or some other fighters to finally realize you've been jiking him all this time. You've been holding out. Guys he hadn't spent as much time with. Guys he wasn't as invested in as he was invested in you and your career. And this is how you thanked him. Yeah, Errol definitely got everything he deserved late July of last year.
Fucking prick.
Finally, upstairs in men's middleweight news, I saw a tweet from reigning unified IBF WBO champion Janibek Alimkhanalai that read simply, soon, inshallah, at Top Rank Boxing and at Turkey Al-Sheikh.
What's inshallah mean?
If God wills it.
It sounds a lot like Janibek is hinting at something that may be underway, something involving him and perhaps some other fighter, some other champion. Of the champions at middleweight, there are really only two available to fight. There is Janibek Alimkhanalai, who I just mentioned, and Erislandy Lara, reigning WBA middleweight champion. Of course, there is the WBC title to think about, but the WBC champion has been absent from this division for years. We're talking about Jermall Charlo, who still reigns as WBC champion for some reason, even though he hasn't fought here in, what's it been, 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
He's got a mandatory challenger in the queue
Yeah.
in Carlos Adames, his PBC stablemate, but the WBC can't seem to get around to either ordering the fight between them or stripping Jermall.
They don't want to.
The PBC themselves, they don't seem to want to make the fight between them. That shouldn't take an order from the WBC to do it when they're both your fighters on your side of the street, fighting on what is your platform, but they don't seem to want to do it either. So the middleweight division is brought to a standstill, where nothing is happening and no one is talking about it.
The division's as dead as a doorknob.
But from out of the blackness,
What?
a ray of light.
Yes!
Ray of hell.
Turki Al-Sheikh and his investment into the sport of boxing, just everything that he's been doing, seems to suggest that he has intimate insights into what the hardcore boxing fans really want, because he's a hardcore boxing fan himself. It's either that or he's really got his ear to the street, making fights that would not otherwise be made if not for his involvement. Fights like Beterbiev versus Bivol, or Crawford versus Madrimov, Zoo versus Ortiz.
These are excellent fights, just 3 to name a few, and the kind of fights that wouldn't be happening if not for his involvement.
It's almost like Turki Al-Sheikh knew where his assistance, where his help was needed. And if he is to continue making an investment into the sport of boxing the way that he has in a short amount of time, the middleweight division is one area that desperately needs his help. Janibek Alimkhanalai as a unified champion.
He's fucked.
Network and promotional politics have not only stifled his ability to really make a name for himself and make a splash, but they've stifled this entire weight class, this entire division. I mean, the PBC has 2 of the 4 titles on their side of the street, and they're not doing a whole lot with them.
They had no intention to.
Not even among their own fighters. But what if Turki Al-Sheikh could make it worth Arislandi Lara's while to take on Janibek Alimkhanalai? How do we know that's not what Janibek is hinting at? Because he tagged His Excellency, and he tagged him for a reason. There are not that many, if any, meaningful fights to make at 160 pounds, but that would be one, at least one. Janibek Alimkhanalai versus Arislandi Lara for 3 of the 4 major titles in the middleweight division.
What about Charlo?
I understand he's still WBC champion, but I also understand that this guy was last in action up there at super middleweight against Jose Benavidez, and I still think he's not coming back down to 160. His days as a middleweight are over.
So why doesn't he vacate the title?
Maybe with a little nudge, a little push from Turki Al-Sheikh, he might. I mean, what if Turki wants to make Janibek Alimkhanalai versus Carlos Adames for 3 of the 4 major titles at this weight?
Well, Carlos Adames said that nobody called him.
Not yet. Maybe what Janibek is hinting at is a fight with Lara, a unification match with Lara. And if that's the situation, yes, I could go for that. Or maybe behind the scenes they're working on an Adames fight, but Adames hasn't been made aware yet. It could be that way. Either way, the middleweight division desperately needs a shot in the arm.
You'd think Arislandi Lara would fight Janibek at his age.
For the right price. I mean, what do you think Lara's been making fight by fight? To fight guys like Cornflake Lamana or Greg Vendetti, Michael Zarafa in his last fight. What do you think the PBC is paying that man for those fights? I'm pretty sure that Turki Al-Sheikh can make it worth his while, even if it is a dangerous fight. It's the best money in the sport right now.
And it's likely a lot more than he's been making.
See the sheer number of PBC fighters involved in Turki Al-Sheikh's U.S. endeavor. They got those PBC guys to participate. Maybe they can get that one.
Hopefully that's what Janibek is hinting at. A unification match with Lara.
It's one of the only good fights you can make at 160.